The ruins of Velhara Prime steamed under a pale sun as Kyle Riven crouched near the wreckage of a downed scout glider, his pulse muffled by the damp hush of jungle rot and broken metal. The air was heavy with spores and the lingering residue of plasma discharge from the orbital skirmish that had driven the Terran Expeditionary Force into retreat. Kyle had been left behind not by mistake, but by sacrifice. He'd drawn enemy fire to cover his unit's withdrawal and crash-landed deep in what the Velharan charts called the Verdant Hollow, a kill zone still crawling with hostile drones and genetically enhanced predators. With only his cracked visor, a bloodied survival blade, and 2 half-drained thermal cells, he moved with practiced silence through the bioluminescent foliage seeking shelter or signals. What he found instead defied every protocol and expectation. Curled against the base of a cracked obelisk was a figure tall, lean, her skin a soft cerulean flush darkened by bruises and dried blood. Her silver hair clung to her face in matted strands, and the gash across her thigh glistened with the unmistakable sheen of neurotoxin. She was alien, unmistakably Velharan, yet armored in ceremonial layers torn and scorched the insignia of a huntress barely visible beneath. The moment hung suspended, breathless, each aware of the other not as enemy, but anomaly. His weapon did not rise. Her eyes, a volatile shade of mercury, did not flinch. Instead, KL knelt. With hands rough from years of combat, he reached slowly, deliberately, and unwrapped a med patch from his ration belt. Her gaze remained locked on his, not with fear, but with something wary and wondering. The patch hissed as it activated against her wound, nanofibers stitching muscle and sealing toxin. She did not speak, but the faint rise of her chest suggested disbelief at the gesture's intimacy, at the unspoken empathy of one warrior to another. As the sun dipped behind the canopy and shadows lengthened, Kale gathered what scraps he could, plating from the wrecked dry moss remnants of a thermal pod, and built a crude shelter beneath the fractured monument. He watched her drift into unconsciousness beside him, her breathing shallow, but even. Above them, an aerial surveillance drone veered past without detecting their presence, its signals swept aside by the natural interference of the hollow. Night came in layers of violet and green mist, and the jungle pulsed with alien life, hostile and unseen. Kale didn't sleep. He listened to the rhythm of her breath and the distant screech of Zerath hounds on the hunt. She was of the species that had once targeted his, but her injuries bore the unmistakable mark of betrayal, not battle. He had saved her out of instinct. The consequences, political or personal, would have to wait. In the silent hours before dawn, when the stars wheeled overhead and the jungle stilled for breath, she shifted in her sleep, her hand brushing lightly against his forearm. There was no conscious choice in his stillness, only a visceral response to the connection forged in silence and mutual vulnerability. The temperature dropped. He wrapped the last thermal layer between them, not out of duty, but out of something he did not yet understand. And in that moment, under fractured stars and forgotten tech, the seed of something irreversible began to stir. Dawn arrived, not as light, but as heat radiating from the jungle canopy, awakening the scent of moss-burned ozone and blood. The wounded huntress stirred eyes flickering open with measured clarity. Though her body was still weak, her movements held instinctive grace, born of a lifetime navigating danger. Kale Riven rose beside her, tightening the makeshift wrap around his wrist where splintered alloy had cut deep during their initial retreat. Their eyes met again, not with surprise this time, but with recognition, a silent acknowledgement that the choices made in the night had bound their fates. Velharan jungle was not forgiving. The terrain shifted alive with deceptive flora and camouflaged predators that moved through roots like smoke. House Vorneth's patrol bots had deployed sentinels throughout the hollow, and the air hummed with encrypted broadcasts too fractured to decode. KL fashioned a support sling from salvaged harness straps and carefully looped it under the huntress's arm, lifting her with a precision that balanced function and care. She did not resist. The weight of her frame against his, though light, brought with it an unfamiliar density, not just physical, but something more elusive, trust forged in violation of law. Every movement was deliberate. He covered her scent with crushed thorn leaves known to disrupt predator pheromones. When they rested, he pressed hydration capsules to her lips, and she drank without question. When they moved again, He adapted his gait to match the shifting burden of her steps. She offered no words, but her presence evolved from passive reliance to quiet partnership. At midday, they crossed a decomposing war cradle from the First Velhara Rebellion, a place where roots had split ancient hulls and birds nested inside helmet cradles. Within, they scavenged a half-functional mapping unit and fragments of a scout's journal written in angular glyphs. She took the device without hesitation, reprogrammed its interface with shaking fingers, and revealed a path northeast toward what was once a hunting shrine, now possibly shelter. Kyle lifted her again, the motion fluid now practiced. The sling pressed her closer against him, her breath warm at his collarbone. When they paused to rest beneath a sheltering stone overhang, he shared his last nutrient bar. She took only half. The gesture, small and unspoken, felt like an offering returned. Later, while thunder pulsed across the sky in low rumbles, they reached a crystalline ravine that shimmered with geothermal light. Beneath the surface lay old structures, half submerged, half alive with bioreactive algae. It was there, in the sanctum of long-forgotten Velharan ancestry, that the tone of their movement shifted. She reached first, steadying him as he slipped on the moss-slick stone. He answered with a hand at her waist as they descended. No dialogue passed between them. Yet each contact lingered longer, each shared glance deepened. At the ravine's edge, they discovered the shattered remains of what had once been a ceremonial forge, its outer hull intact, inner core dormant. Within, Kale discovered what looked like a biosphere pod, ancient, dormant, but humming faintly with residual energy. The glyphs that pulsed along its seams matched those in the map. Her fingers trembled as she traced the symbols. The air around them had thickened, not with humidity, but with an anticipation that neither training nor history could explain. Kale cleared the overgrowth, slicing away vines to reveal the pod's heart chamber, a medical sanctuary shaped like a coiled spiral designed for dual occupants. Recognition lit in her eyes. This was not just a chamber of healing. This was a relic of Velharan legacy, a pod designed for resonance where biology and energy intertwined in union. She pointed to her wound. The neurotoxin had slowed but not stopped. Without the pod, she would not survive another day. The glyphs required 2 signatures, 2 pulses aligned to activate the biosync, a guardian and a mate. Kale stepped forward. No hesitation. He placed his hand beside hers on the console skin against glowing crystal. The chamber responded instantly. Light enveloped them, wrapping their forms in a current of sensory information, so intense it bypassed language. As the pod closed, sealing them in a matrix of suspended light and organic filaments, their bodies floated in slow proximity. Thin strands of biogel cradled their limbs, while neural tendrils connected to spine and skull. Thoughts began to blur. His memories of war, cold nights on Earth, boot camps, and sand drills. Her memories of ceremony, of triumph, of betrayal at the hands of House Vorneth. Sorrow, resentment, pride, curiosity, all flowed between them, filtered not by words but emotion. Their consciousness fused gradually, a resonance forged not by design but by surrender. He felt her breath before she took it. She experienced his heartbeat as her own. The pain of her wound became his burden. The ache in his shoulder eased under her empathy. Through every sensory channel, their beings meshed. At the edge of their union, something stirred. Not a vision, not memory. A pulse new, distinct not from either of them, yet rooted in both. The pod's systems accelerated, colors intensifying. The glyphs restructured. A third pattern appeared, faint but unmistakable, the echo of genetic fusion. Not a metaphor. A signal of nascent life. Neither recoiled, neither feared. Suspended in light, their shared awareness tightened around this revelation, not as crisis, but as promise. The pod thrummed, calibrated, and stabilized. When it released them hours later, they collapsed together on the forge floor, damp, breathless skin marked with residual light that had not been there before. Her hand moved slowly to her abdomen, then to his chest. The jungle still raged outside, but within the ruins, something irreversible had taken root beyond protocol, beyond species, beyond war. The jungle outside the ravine pulsed with a different rhythm now, as if the very canopy had sensed the change. Kyle Riven stood at the edge of the broken forge chamber, newly clothed in layers of adaptive armor pieced together from scavenged plates and ceremonial fabric. The biosphere pod behind him glowed with residual energy, a fading echo of what had just transpired. Inside him, the resonance still thrummed, an imprint of shared memory reflex, an emotion left behind by the link. Beside him, Thyra Vale moved with renewed strength, her once fatal wound now little more than a fading scar beneath skin that shimmered faintly with bioluminescent veins. Their movements were no longer coordinated by practice, but by instinct. She reached for a fallen spear before he did, sensing his intent. He bent to retrieve a shard of visor glass, just as she turned to shield him from incoming wind shift. Every motion wove together in unspoken tandem. Their footsteps did not echo, but merged in cadence. This was no accident of shared trauma or proximity. The pod had not merely healed, it had fused. Deeper within the shrine's vault, Kale uncovered remnants of Velhara Wartech, an arc glaive whose blade responded to emotional focus and a neural mesh visor designed for dual-spectrum vision, normally calibrated to Velharan physiology, now effortlessly synced to him. He gripped the glaive and felt its pulse shift as though recognizing him through her. Thyra took the visor, adjusted its nodes, and handed it to him without hesitation. No commands passed between them. Their coordination required none. When the Zerath hounds arrived, it wasn't with stealth. They howled in unison, a piercing call that signaled convergence. The biome had marked the intruders with pheromone trails, and now the predators closed in through root networks and hanging moss. Kale turned before the first beast breached the clearing. Thyra leapt beside him, both poised not in panic, but in calculated stance. He raised the arc glaive, its edges shimmering with neural intensity. She triggered a sonic disruptor embedded in the archway, staggering the lead beast mid-leap. As it recoiled, Kale twisted into a sweeping arc, cleaving through bio-armored hide with an efficiency that startled even the jungle's witness. The second hound struck from the side, but Thyra was already there. Her movements were no longer grounded in learned aggression, they were fused with his timing, his rhythm. She pivoted off his momentum, driving her crescent blade into the soft ridge of the creature's eye cluster. A tremor passed through her arm, not from recoil, but from resonance. She felt the beast's final pulse through him. As the third and fourth hounds encircled the forest, seemed to breathe with the clash, the duo moved in a spiral mirroring the coil of the biosphere pod. Their bodies flowed like a helix, twin strands of violence and grace. Kale ducked low. Thyra vaulted above. He parried a slashing claw. She redirected it into a downward stab. Neither missed. Neither flinched. When the last beast collapsed with a cry that shook the old trees, silence returned not as absence, but reverence. The shrine pulsed once more as if acknowledging their survival, not as individuals, but as a single fused entity. They did not pause. The victory was not enough. Somewhere beyond the Hollow House Vorneth's signal relay still operated broadcasting coordinates, monitoring movement, waiting for confirmation of their deaths. Thyra gestured toward the east ridge, where vines wrapped around a broken watchtower like skeletal hands. He nodded. The relay would be there. As they ran, the jungle no longer resisted. The roots seemed to shift aside just slightly, the air less dense with interference. Systems that once recognized her alone now responded to both. Kyle's retinal feed flickered with translated glyphs. Thyra's pulse synchronized with his through proximity alone. Their fusion was not just physiological, it had awakened dormant technology left from the old war systems that required dual imprinting to activate. Within the ruins of the tower, they discovered what Vorneth had feared most. A tactical hub once belonging to the old Velharan Alliance, still intact and connected to the orbital grid. Through the neural mesh, Kale touched the console. Through him, Thyra focused. Together, they accessed records buried beneath protocol firewalls. Projected on the fractured stone wall, the truth unfurled. House Vorneth had manipulated the trials, redirecting beasts, deploying synthetic bait-altering terrain maps to eliminate rivals. The attempt on her life had been no failure of procedure. It had been assassination under ceremonial guise. The console hummed with more than data. Embedded in its memory core was an override protocol designed for emergency command realignment locked behind a genetic cipher. Thyra placed her hand against the panel. Nothing. Kyle placed his beside hers. Still nothing. But as their fingers overlapped, the panel pulsed open with quiet finality. The resonance within them had become the key. Their union, forbidden and unrecorded, had created a new genetic signature, a hybrid interface. The console accepted them as one. Above, distant orbital satellites realigned. Below, subroutines awakened. The ancient tech did not distinguish between Velharan and human. It read intent synchronization harmony. For the first time in decades, the tactical grid lit up in gold rather than red. Outside, the wind shifted. A new signal went live. Across Velhara Prime, every ancient relay still active broadcasted a single encrypted pulse, one that no single species had the code to read, but which both factions would feel in their bones. Kyle looked out over the jungle. Thyra stood beside him, her palm resting where faint light still pulsed across her midsection. They were no longer prey, no longer fugitives. They were something new, something the old world had no language to define. The storm was coming, but this time they would meet it together, not as separate warriors, but as one force bound by more than survival. The storm arrived not in rain, but in signal-dense, encrypted waves flooding the atmosphere as House Vorneth's strike carriers broke orbital silence. From the edge of the stratosphere to the jungle floor, their presence pressed down like a clenched fist. Dropships pierced the cloud layers, deploying legions of black armored enforcers in synchronized formations. Tactical displays across both factions' networks flared with movement markers and urgent directives. Yet within the jungle's fractured heart, Kael Riven and Thyra Vale moved with the poise of predators who knew every trap, every pattern, every pulse of the terrain. Their fusion had matured. What began as shared awareness had evolved into something fluid and dangerous, a living algorithm of survival prediction and adaptability. Kael no longer needed to glance to know where Thyra would be. Her reflexes had become a second nervous system to his. In turn, her understanding of spatial flow had absorbed his tactical instinct, his human improvisation. Their weapons hummed with neural sync. Their bodies had stopped resisting the fusion. They had become it. The first assault wave descended at twilight. Drones, sleek and fast, screamed through the canopy, sweeping with electro-pulse cannons, meant to disable before dismembering. Kael and Thyra didn't wait. They moved like stormlight, silent, blinding, and gone before the enemy registered damage. His arc glaive split drone armor with the precision of thought. Her disruptor arcs surged through machine minds like static prophecy. Beneath the crimson trees of the hollow, they fought not as insurgents, but as a myth unfolding. Motion sensors failed to track them. Radar painted silhouettes that blinked between Velharan and human profiles before shorting out. The jungle seemed to rise in their defense vines, wrapping around intruders, root systems pulsing with the strange energy awakened by their union. At the base of a ruined comm spire, Kael accessed a dormant fusion core rerouting energy through the old Velharan amplifiers. His vision blurred with interface overlays, but Thyra stood close, grounding him. Her pulse steadied his hand. Their links surged into the system, rewriting code through emotional harmonics the machines had not been built to defend against. Ancient war engines flickered awake, no longer loyal to bloodlines, but to resonance. Vorneth forces found themselves hunted by constructs once used in the old wars. Mechs that had been dormant for generations now moved with uncanny coordination, mirroring the rhythms of Kael and Thyra's fused battle patterns. What they fought beside was not an army, but an echo of Union weaponized. In the moments between battles, they pressed onward. Thyra's steps remained light, yet her breaths had deepened. The glow beneath her skin had intensified. Kael could sense the shift. The new life between them had not just survived, it had begun to amplify. Each heartbeat rippled outward, triggering dormant biofields, reawakening Velharan systems, long thought lost to decay. When the final Vorneth command unit attempted to triangulate their position using neural jammers, Kael and Thyra turned the signal back upon them. Using their fused interface, they flooded the command net with simulated troop signatures drawn from historical combat records. Within seconds, the Vorneth formation collapsed under phantom pressure. From the ridge above, they watched chaos unfold. The once cohesive units now fired into shadows, mistaking echoes for insurgents. Confusion swept their hierarchy. Orders were contradicted. The command lattice fractured. Kale exhaled slowly, the air thick with ozone and burnt moss. The neural mesh beneath his skin thrummed with her presence. He could feel her stabilizing the growing connection, her focus anchoring the increasing energy surges radiating from their unborn child. Not a burden, but a beacon. Their offspring was already interfacing, projecting fragments of anticipation, protection, purpose. Thyra lifted her hand, and above them the ancient totem tower activated. It had not pulsed in centuries. Now its crystalline lattice beamed a wide-spectrum burst across the sky, visible from both orbit and ground. It was not a warning. It was an invitation. The Velharan clans, long fractured by power struggles and isolationist decrees, registered the signal. Human fleets orbiting in cautious neutrality picked it up as well, an unclassified pattern laced with mathematical symmetries, drawn from both Earth and Velharan DNA sequences. The pattern held no threat, yet it triggered emotional subroutines in artificial minds, stimulated neural curiosity and bio-augmented command officers. Across both sides, the message translated with stark clarity: unity is not theoretical. In the Temple of Consensus, high in the floating city of Thalsuun clan, elders paused. In orbit above the Terran diplomatic envoy, suspended their blackout protocols. What they saw in the transmission was more than cross-species cooperation. It was proof of synthesis, proof of legacy, proof that war could birth something more powerful than conquest. Back on the ground, Kale and Thyra moved toward the final relay site, a ceremonial platform once used to declare mating bonds among Velharan warlords. It was here that the Vornith leader Varn Kareth had planned his final stand, flanked by enhanced enforcers. His armor fused with old blood codes, his voice filtered through tactical arrogance. He never expected what stepped into the clearing. Not two desperate fugitives, but a single force split across two forms. Kale radiated precision and focus, his gate fluid blade at the ready. Thyra shimmered with ancestral energy, her body both blade and banner, her every step echoing with unspoken authority. They did not announce themselves. The jungle spoke for them. The machines responded for them. The ancient stones beneath their feet lit up in cascading lines, acknowledging not war, but succession. The enforcers faltered, uncertain. Their target was no longer an enemy. It was something unclassified, something holy. And as Kyle raised his blade and Thyra stepped beside him, their child's pulse extended outward in a final surge, projecting clarity, history, and possibility into every thinking mind within range. The battle was over before it began. Not with blood, but with recognition. The aftermath unfurled like a breath held too long, then released across the fractured world. The clans, once locked in rivalry and suspicion, converged around the broadcast, like ships drawn to gravity wells, unable to deny the data and the instinct rising in their blood. The Terran command, known for its procedural rigidity and empirical skepticism, broke protocol not with force, but with awe. They had seen many threats in the galaxy machines, plagues, warlords, but never a signal wrapped in harmony and encoded with a fusion that transcended biology. Kael Riven and Thyra Vale stood at the eye of that shift, not as victors crowned in war, but as something more enduring proof of what could emerge when survival no longer fed on fear. On the ceremonial platform beneath the old starlit tree of Velhara, they activated the relay stone. Its activation sequence did not draw from authority but from resonance. It required not command codes but compatible pulses. When they touched its surface, it responded with a cascade of light pale gold and rich indigo, spiraling outward like veins across the continent. The neural mesh integrated the signal into both networks. On Earth's orbital platform, strategists watched as encrypted data from the platform merged seamlessly with their systems, unlocking access to Velharan archives and schematics long considered myth. On the surface, Velharan elders received simultaneous images, glyphs transforming into neural graphs, their ancestral war chants folding into Earth's harmonics. The relay had not been designed for speech. It had been designed for truth. Varn Kareth, stripped of his command codes and surrounded by systems that no longer obeyed him, fled into the outer wilds. His retreat was not documented by his own house. Instead, it was the remaining enforcers, once loyal, now questioning, who turned toward Kyle, and Thyra lowered their weapons and stepped aside. There was no ceremony, no salute, just stillness. Surrender not of body, but of belief. In the days that followed, the ancient halls of the Velharan conclave, long sealed to outsiders, opened not with reluctance but with invitation. The elders emerged bearing relics that no human had ever witnessed: stone tablets encoded with genetic drift maps, ceremonial sashes woven with fibers that glowed when touched by empathy, and crystalline embryos stored in stasis samples of lives that had never found a compatible vessel, until now. Kyle walked among them without armor. He carried no weapon, yet everywhere he stepped, systems awoke. Lights followed his passage. Bioreactive walls rippled as his resonance synced with ancient glyphs. He was not a conqueror, he was a bridge. Thyra stood at his side, her bearing unaltered, still fierce and regal. Her skin bore new markings, unbidden organic, the natural expression of the bond they had formed. She was not diminished by sharing her legacy, she was expanded. Her voice now carried not only her own thoughts, but echoes of his insights from another world, perspectives, born in Terran deserts and human struggle. Their unborn twins, still growing within her, had already begun to affect systems. Medical diagnostics showed accelerated development without instability. Neural scans revealed oscillating pulses that mirrored combat reflexes and harmonic speech patterns. Geneticists from both factions, once dubious, now met in shared awe. The children were not anomalies. They were possibilities. In the council chambers of Thal Suun, a proposal was drafted not just for alliance but for integration. A new academy would be built where human and Velharan younglings could train together. Its curriculum would blend Terran adaptive strategy with Velharan combat artistry. Its instructors would come from both worlds. At its head would stand Kale and Thyra, not as administrators, but as embodiments of the academy's founding principle, harmony through shared survival. And beneath that proposal, in fine print laced with emotional resonance markers, was a clause that had never existed in any treaty before: recognition of the fused. The term referred not to hybrids, but to any being whose resonance had been forged through shared struggle and chosen unity. When the announcement was made, it did not come from a podium. It came from a new platform grown from Velharan crystal and human alloy, raised at the edge of the verdant hollow where it all began. The jungle had not been cleared. Instead, it had been incorporated. The trees leaned in, the moss flowed around the edges, and standing at the center, Kyle and Thyra clasped hands as the newborn relay pulsed into life, transmitting a sequence both primal and mathematical. Across the stars, watchers and wanderers paused. The signal spread beyond the Velharan system. Pirates, traders, scientists, diplomats, they all received it. None understood it completely, but all felt its pull, a pull not to power, but to connection. In the private chambers of the Academy's central spire, Kyle traced the newest pulses from their children, now strong enough to trigger sensory fields in their sleep. One stirred whenever he approached, projecting warmth and curiosity. The other pulsed sharp patterns of anticipation as though counting down to arrival. Thyra moved behind him, her form radiant in the starlight filtered through biosynthetic panels. She did not speak. She did not need to. Their silence was layered with meaning, with memory, with the knowing that nothing between them had been accidental. She placed his hand over her abdomen, where the twin pulses throbbed like twin moons rising. What they had built was not fragile. It had survived jungle beasts, political assassination, and the weight of millennia of war. Now it faced its truest challenge, peace. And yet, within that challenge, lay the most dangerous power of all: the capacity to choose love again and again, not as a diversion from duty, but as the deepest form of it. A cycle passed. The once silent biotowers of Velhara now bloomed with light, their crystalline cores humming not with threat, but with invitation. Around them, the jungle thrived in cooperation with the architecture roots, braided into walls, glowing fauna, nested in engineered alcoves, and the sounds of life echoed through spaces once reserved for war. In the training sanctum at the heart of the new academy, the next generation of fused warfare and diplomacy was taking shape. Kale Riven stood on the observation deck in silence. his arms folded behind his back as he watched students, human and Velharan alike, move through formation drills on a moss-draped platform suspended over a valley of singing stone. Their movements, though rough at the edges, mirrored the dual-pattern discipline now called resonance form, a technique birthed in a jungle fight and now adopted by two civilizations. Below, instructors directed the cadets in pairs, adjusting alignment, not just of muscle but of instinct. The exercises emphasized synchronization, breath-matching, emotional harmonization. What had once been the secret advantage of two bonded fugitives had become the cornerstone of an emerging discipline, one that required not obedience but openness. Behind Kale, the chamber door opened with a whisper, and Thyra Vale entered, her movements slow but certain. The weight of near-term gestation softened none of her presence. If anything, the resonance between her and the growing lives inside her intensified her radiance. Her ceremonial garb had been adapted, integrating earth textiles with Velharan flow patterns, both practical and symbolic. She stepped beside Kyle and exhaled her breath, fogging faintly against the cool of the reinforced crystal. Their eyes met, and between them passed a pulse, unspoken but felt. One of the twins had just sent a waking burst, an emotion packet dense with amusement and curiosity. Even before birth, their children communicated not as individuals, but as a joint field. Neural scans confirmed what the scholars only whispered, that these children were the first of a new psychic architecture capable of broadcasting affective states over distance, bonding with technology through intuitive feedback, and even harmonizing biological systems around them. In preparation, the conclave had built the Temple of Interface at the edge of the Ridge of Stillness. It was both maternity chamber and psychic conduit, designed not to isolate birth, but to amplify its signal. Its biostructure shifted in anticipation of the day colors changing in resonance with fetal rhythms. When the time came, the temple would not be sterile. It would be alive, it would witness. Ambassadors from a dozen worlds had requested presence. None were guaranteed. The decision would fall not to the elders, but to the pulse of the parents themselves, and to the unspoken will of the unborn. These were not mere heirs. They were catalysts. Kale placed his palm over Thyra's midsection where the twin pulses flared in layered harmony. Beneath his skin, a responding glow flickered to life, the same markings that had emerged in the forge chamber during their bonding now permanent. Every time he touched her, the symbols pulsed in gentle arcs, as if acknowledging their creator. He felt no fear, only clarity. The moment of convergence arrived beneath a twin eclipse where the larger of Velhara's moons crossed behind its sibling and cast the valley in silver twilight. In the Temple of Interface, surrounded by living murals and ancestral songlines encoded in vibrating stone, Thyra lay in the resonance cradle. Kyle knelt beside her, fingers interlaced with hers, as the biochamber responded to the culmination of fusion. The births were swift, guided by a field of energy that needed no instruments. As the twins entered the world, their cries harmonized, instantly forming not a wail, but a tone ancient and impossible, resonating with frequencies buried in the genetic core of both species. The temple responded. Its walls glowed brighter than ever recorded. Crystalline structures realigned. The surrounding valley went silent, birds stilling in trees, predators freezing mid-stride. A transmission, unintentional but undeniable, rippled out across Velhara and beyond. In the aftermath, Kyle and Thyra held their children beneath the carved dome, their bodies trembling with shared awe. Zarek Riven. The boy bore his father's earth-toned depth and his mother's luminous eyes. Lyra Vale. The girl bore her mother's cobalt fire and her father's quiet calm. Both pulsed with markings not inked, but born, moving beneath their skin like starlight through rivers. From orbit to outpost across science labs and ritual sanctuaries, the world shifted. No more talk of dominance. No more fear of contamination. These children had made the old arguments obsolete. And in the days that followed, the new era was not announced with fanfare or decree. It was simply lived. Kale trained cadets in resonance tactics. Thyra oversaw diplomatic transmissions that now ended with pulses instead of signatures. Zarek learned to levitate stones before he could walk. Lyra absorbed languages from dreams. Their family became legend, but not through myth, through visibility, through ordinary acts repeated with extraordinary consequence. A touch that healed, a gaze that soothed, a laugh that united strangers. And when the time came, as it always does, for the question to be asked, what began all this, Kale's answer would be simple. A single choice made in a jungle of ruin and silence. Not to kill, but to care. And so concludes the story of Kale Riven and Thyra Vael, a tale not only of survival, but of transformation, of fusion, and of legacy. From the haunted ruins of Velhara Prime to the heart of a new civilization, their journey proved that when instinct gives way to empathy, and when biology meets trust, entire species can change course. The birth of Zarek and Lyra was not the end, but a beginning proof that shared purpose can bridge centuries of war, that resonance can replace rivalry, and that love, when forged through fire and silence, leaves an imprint on the galaxy that no weapon can erase. If this story moved you, if you felt the heartbeat of the jungle, the glow of the interface, or the pulse of fusion between two impossible souls, then consider leaving a comment. What part of their journey struck you most? Could this be humanity's fate among the stars? Subscribe to the channel for more long-form sci-fi tales where love meets danger and the impossible becomes legacy. Your support helps keep these epic stories alive. Until next time, may your instincts be sharp, your heart open, and your path lit by resonance.